Ani, Bojo, and welcome to Night of the Indigenous Devs. Tonight, Megan Byrne from Indigenous-made Games has brought to you an evening of celebration of Indigenous video game talent from around the world. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the land that I am currently on. So we at Imaginative acknowledge that this land, located on present-day Toronto, is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Huron-Wendat, and the Mississaugas of the Credits. We acknowledge the Dish with One Spoon Covenant, a treaty whose spirit is one based in collective stewardship and reciprocity. We take the spirit of this covenant to the core of our operations as we bring artists and audiences from many nations across the globe together through our various initiatives and activities. Please take a moment to acknowledge the land that you currently reside upon, wherever you may be, and acknowledge those who went before and those yet to come. I also like to add before we begin, one last thing, is that this event is a part of Imaginative's 2020 giveaway project, where we'll be gifting from the spirit and for the spirit to acknowledge the continued support and work from our communities. Your attendance to this event automatically signs you up to be eligible to win a gift card valued at $250 to Manitoba Mucklucks. We will announce the winners at the end of this event, so keep an eye out. This event is brought to you with support from Eastside Games. I'm Mîkiwâm, and enjoy the event.
The 21st Imaginative Film and Media Arts Festival, the world's largest presentation of Indigenous film and media works. Join us online from October 20th to the 25th, 2020. Passes available now at imaginative.org.
Eastside Games is a mobile game studio. We make idle games both on really successful, famous, hilarious IP like Trailer Park Boys and It's Always Sunny, and we also make games on original IP as well. So you might want to go back and watch all of the Trailer Park Boys episodes. So we created a narrative idle game so you could play an entire episode within minutes, and with our special events you could relive the greatest jokes, the greatest Ricky-isms that are out there. So you'll play our games, you'll go back and watch some of the content, you might join a fan group or dig your old Trailer Park t-shirt out and then go back and play the game again. So it just becomes part of serving super fans. Community is everything. And so everything that we build while listening to the fans. We're one of the only mobile game studios in the world that has a community team in-house and as large as ours and plays a pivotal point in every decision we make. ESG Cares is what we give back to the community with. Right now we're focusing on LGBTQ, women in tech, the downtown east side in Vancouver, and Indigenous peoples. These are the charities that we want to make sure that we're focusing in on and we're supporting, but also, since we live in Vancouver, that we're growing with these in mind whenever we're doing any sort of outreach, team building, community building. Our goal in 2020 is to be the world's leader in narrative idle games and to build a kick-ass team of misfits and pirates to get that done. It blows my mind that we're able to not only bring these IPs to life, but really introduce these IPs to a new generation worth of fans. We're a Canadian company through and through, and we've done a lot of great Canadian IP with some more Canadian IP coming out, but we are looking at a global lens. That being said, I have a big secret in that we're gonna do the Littlest Hobo game any day soon, and it'll be the most Canadian collab ever done. And then I'll run for Prime Minister and I'll be done. I don't know if I could get that IP, probably.
Ani, Beth LaPonce here, Anishinaabe, Métis, and Irish designer of Thunderbird Strike, a lightning-searing side-scroller where you play as a Thunderbird striking lightning down at big giant mining trucks. And, most recently, When Rivers Were Trails, a point-and-click Indigenous spin on Oregon Trail with contributions from 30 Indigenous writers. On behalf of Indigenous game devs, thank you for joining in on Night of the Indigenous Devs, a vital step for self-determined Indigenous games, brought to you by Imaginative and Achimo-Stawanan Games. Indigenous Game Devs is a community for Indigenous game developers from aspiring to established, where we showcase our work and share resources. If you're Indigenous and interested in or involved in making games, connect with us at indigenousgamedevs.com. Mîkiwâm, and enjoy the show!
Kanzi, Megan Bernasika-san, Apatawaco-si-san, Hamilton, Ontario, Nugent. Hi everyone, I'm Megan Byrne and I am Apatawaco-si-san, or Métis from Ontario, and I was born and raised in Hamilton, Ontario. I would like to welcome you to Night of the Indigenous Devs. I am speaking to you as the owner and lead game designer of Achimo-Stawanan Games, an Indigenous-owned and majority Indigenous staffed indie game studio out of Ontario. We are so excited that you could come tonight. I am overwhelmed at the support and the joy people have gotten out of Night of the Indigenous Devs last year when we were at the TIFF Bell Lightbox as part of Imaginative. And again, we're part of Imaginative this year, but online. And thank you for joining us wherever across the world that you may be, and whichever territory or traditional lands that you rest on. As a game designer and an Indigenous person, it has always been a struggle to speak truthfully about what I want to speak about in video games. Too often are we told that we have to present our indigeneity in video games in a particular way. And when I was with Imaginative last year and developed Night of the Indigenous Devs, I wanted to create a space where Indigenous people could just be game devs and just show their stories the way they want to show their stories, without having to perform their indigeneity, without having to be grounded in history, without having to be educational to anyone else. This is just about supporting Indigenous game devs in the way that they want to be seen. And so I'm so excited that this year we're offering these 5 amazing projects by these 5 amazing creatives and groups from across Canada and the world. As Beth said, as part of the Indigenous Game Dev group, we're starting to create spaces beyond just Night of the Indigenous Devs, where throughout the year we can be supportive and be that space for Indigenous game devs to speak the way they want to speak and talk about games and show games the way they want to show these games. And so if you are Indigenous, if you enjoy video games and making video games, or if you enjoy making tabletop games or role-playing games, definitely come and check it out on indigenousgamedevs.com and ask to join our Discord. And so I say thank you to you for joining us. I say thank you to all of our creatives for being a part of this event. I say thank you to Imaginative for being our host and supporting Indigenous developers and media creators from across the world and in all the forms of screen-based media that we want to be seen on and play with. And a big, big miigwech to Eastside Games for being our lead sponsor of this event. So without further ado, let's play these games.
Hi, my name is Shondine Yazzie Woodward. I'm an art director on Button City and a co-founder of my studio Subliminal. So Button City is a narrative adventure game. It's a cute, colorful, low-poly game about a fox and his friends are trying to save their local arcade shut down. It's a game about friendship, community. There's some light puzzling. There's some arcade games. It's about a lot of kid culture in there and just embracing a love for arcades, nostalgia, and growing up and saving the things that are important to you. So Button City started off as an original concept of mine about 3 years ago. I had just started learning 3D modeling. I was kind of just messing around in Blender. I was making low poly characters, and one of the first projects that I made was a little fox on an island with a house, and people really started enjoying that, and it kind of it just kind of took off, and the fox ended up becoming like our main character on that character. He always started off as like a cute little shy boy. I was originally drawn to low poly for its simplicity and for the aesthetic. I use a limited color palette in the game. There are probably about like 64 colors, maybe a few more. And we don't have any light sources, so all of the placement of the shadows and the colors are deliberately kind of laid out on the 3D models. So it's an interesting hybrid. I came from a 2D art background. I used a lot of like vector illustration, and it kind of felt like making vector art in 3D. By using low poly, I got to focus on kind of building this game out with very simple, deliberate shapes. But a lot of the pieces, they're very like chunky, and they don't have a lot of detail. But the goal was to create kind of like a visual rhythm by taking a lot of smaller objects and really setting them into a world that felt lived in. So having a limited palette combined with having like this low poly, very minimalistic approach to building out art and characters and worlds, it was very, very challenging and fun at the same time. I had to be very considerate about like what colors work together, how to build simple objects out of like the fewest shapes and like edges and points possible. Like for most cylinders or like a little coffee cup, it would have like 5 sides, and it was really fun. I'm incredibly excited and thankful to be part of such Indigenous game developers. It really is an amazing community, and I'm so happy that I could lend my voice to this, and I hope you all enjoy Button City. Thank you.
Danse asabis sigasan maskochistic ortsinia. My name is Kira Lightning. I'm from Samson Cremation. I am a graduate student at the University of Alberta, and I am the writer and designer for the game Mîkiwâm.
Dante, I'm Kaylee Lightning, and I'm also from Samson Cremation. I'm currently attending my 4th year of Indigenous Environmental Studies at Trent University, and I'm the artist for Mîkiwâm.
How did we develop this game, Kaylee?
Our whole, I guess, passion for this came from going to Imaginative just randomly last year for the first time, and seeing all the cool creators there, and going to Night of the Indigenous Devs and for drinks afterwards with everyone was like really what got the ball rolling for us. It just inspired us so much. And that night we said to each other, we've got to do something and get it in next year.
Yeah. We didn't really start trying to make anything until just before like the submission time, like we kept saying we were going to. But we were talking about like designs all year, but we like floated a whole bunch of different types of games that we might do, like all kind of visual novels, because we love visual novels and we always play them together. But you're a 2D artist, and I write and love visual novels, so I thought I really want to try to write one. And so we just had to figure out like the right software and stuff to use. And then kind of the tea making mechanic took a bit to really get to.
Mm-hmm.
And that was inspired by a few of my favorite visual novel / like more than visual novel games, like Valhalla Cyberpunk Bartender, especially because I loved the idea that like instead of influencing the storyline through your like choice of dialogue, you would influence the storyline through what drinks you choose to serve to somebody. So we wanted to kind of like indigenize that mechanic by making it tea. And I love to learn about plants and about herbalism. So we designed that whole thing around like actual plants and the ways that they're sorted into elements in some traditions.
Mm-hmm. And we've always wanted to make something together. I just remembered that.
Yeah.
For like years, we've always been saying we should make something together, since you're the writer and I'm the artist. And I remember we wanted to make a graphic novel or like a show or a cartoon or something. And then I don't know why we never thought of visual novel until
yeah,
like,
we play them all the time. Yeah, we play them all the time, and I play a lot of like little ones that are just like made by people independently. But I don't know, it never occurred to me that we could do that. And boy, it was a lot of work though.
Mm-hmm.
What else? So Mîkiwâm is kind of set in a fantasy Indigenous alternate world. And that was because we really wanted to have freedom to like explore with our imaginations, like a storyline that deals with things that are real and personal, but to not feel like tethered to needing to represent specific people or specific places or specific traditions.
And then, should I say the part of like, there's a lot of pressure on Indigenous artists to like create stuff within this bubble that people think it should look like, and to make sure you're always representing things accurately and stuff like that. So we really wanted to kind of get out of that to just be able to do what we want in this universe.
And I think it's really legit that we do have a lot to consider. And so I did consider those things about like representation. But it's so important to be able to express ourselves without like having those spaces to actually just like express ourselves and feel that freedom. And that like just like any other people, we can have imaginations that are not just tethered to the past or to what we've been taught. What else did we not talk about?
The importance of having it look nice and having the nice music and the nice, not setting, but like, and not vibe, but like, you know.
Vibe is a good word, I think.
Vibe, good vibes.
Yeah.
And for it to be relaxing to play.
Yeah.
And for everything to be cohesive with like all of the interface, and the color scheme and all of that.
Yeah, one of my favorite things about visual novels is how kind of relaxing they are. To me, they're just so immersive, and especially some of them, like when they have good music and good looks and just like a vibe that is relaxing. And so we wanted it to be something that would just make people feel good. And like maybe ignite the imagination of other people too. And we've really built way more of a story than is captured in this little bit, partly because learning how to use all the tools and getting all of that set up took so much time and effort. But there is way more to the story about Mîkiwâm and about more characters that we have made but haven't been put in yet that will be coming at some point.
I don't know where I'm going. Hey, remember when we were kids? Remember that game we used to play? You sucked. Count to 10, hey?
Hey, you asleep? What are you doing? Haven't you heard? No one knows where Victor is. He left our program after Liam passed. You've got to check out where he was staying. See if you can find out where he went. We don't want him to end up on the streets. You know how talented he is. Well, what are you waiting for? Hurry up, get up.
Hi, I'm Leanne Ireland. I'm the Executive Director at the Urban Society for Aboriginal Youth, or USAY, and I am the writer and producer on Finding Victor, which is a virtual reality escape room that we created in 2019. Finding Victor was created because we were trying to come up with ways to support youth that were at risk of homelessness and to have conversations about reaching out for supports and accessing services that were available to them. And that was like a really important part of this game, was to encourage youth to access resources, solve problems, and build skills. Unlike other VR creators, we're a charity, so we work to create supports and games and resources that are educational and support social justice issues and change. And that's a really big component of what Finding Victor is all about. Initially, Finding Victor was actually a real life escape room. We did a pop-up event in 2017 where we had over 100 Indigenous kids come from various schools throughout Calgary, and they solved clues and puzzles and interacted with each other in teams to solve puzzles and find the story about Victor. And that was really inspiring to us, and we wanted to offer that experience to others through virtual reality. The story of Victor is about a young man who loses his best friend Liam to suicide, and he is struggling with depression and loss, and he's in child welfare, which is a very common issue among the kids that we serve. And he's just feeling disconnected and hopeless. And that's where you, as the player in Finding Victor, start. You're a friend of Victor's. You wake up, you get a phone call from a youth worker asking you to help find Victor. And you start with this party house where he's gone to kind of couch surf and get away from his foster family. And you have to solve some clues. You learn that Victor's an artist and he's kind of struggling to find himself, and that his friend has been lost. We also show a letter from child welfare. We show a picture of his grandmother from residential schools. And we try to bring in this legacy of intergenerational trauma and the ideas of hardship that cause homelessness, and kind of build these connections between why someone might end up homeless. And then you follow Victor escaping that situation and ending up on the streets where, he creates this artwork and he gets a pamphlet and some information, learning about some programs that he can utilize his artwork in a more positive way. And then you find Victor in a youth center. So he's actually accessed some of those supports. He's got a locker, he's created a mural, and then he's successfully been housed. And so we really wanted to show that transition from, getting into trouble, doing some sort of interacting negatively, dealing with some trauma, and then making that kind of journey towards successful housing, finding yourself, and being more connected to your culture. And I think we successfully achieved that through kind of these internal dialogues that were recorded by an actor named Telly James. He recorded these internal dialogues of Victor and the struggles that he was having. And then we were able to have Stacey De Silva, who's another actress in the city, act as the youth worker to develop the hint and clue system. And this is encouraging the player to move along and know what's next for them, and kind of lead them down their journey a little bit. I think something that's really interesting is that we named it Finding Victor because we wanted to have that kind of nod to smoke signals and that, hey, Victor, which most Indigenous people kind of reference when they're talking about movies that are really important to our community and our people. The inspiration for this was a lot of Indigenous youth in our programs are kind of these graffiti aerosol artists, and they're kind of young and they're finding themselves and they're dealing with some struggles that no young person should have to deal with. And once they kind of embrace art and expression and find their voice, they become, leaders and change makers in our community. And so we kind of wanted to follow that through line with this project, which I think we did quite successfully. It was really important to us to include musicians and artists. So we had a graffiti artist come in and use king spray and tilt brush to create the murals and artwork you see throughout the game. And so including like a strong Indigenous artist in that and having that kind of persona, I think was really, really effective in the inclusion of lots of Indigenous people through a layered approach to the game. And then we also sought out musicians. So each level and the introduction and end both have different Indigenous musicians that have provided their music to Finding Victor, which is super cool. Overall, the game has been super successful. We've demonstrated it to tons of people, and the feedback has been overwhelmingly positive, which is great. We really liked this kind of comic book style and this not overly Indigenous traditional piece that we've kind of done in the past. And that's been appealing to a lot of young Indigenous people who maybe aren't as connected with their tradition or culture as we'd like. But that's been really appealing to them, and it's been really interesting. Overall, I loved working on Finding Victor. I love the kind of style and the urban feeling that it has. And I think that it offers a lot of really interesting learnings. And it's really just a fun game. It's fun to solve puzzles and to kind of have that fun progression through the different levels. And I think that we integrated those fun aspects with the learning aspects really well. And I hope that people that are playing it really enjoy finding the journey and finding Victor.
He's got a locker at USay now. Go find him.
You didn't know that? You know how much candy I bankrolled from these machines when I was a kid?
Oh yeah, he's really something. Yeah. Do it for my brother, do it for my cousin. Do it for my sister, do it for my mother, do it for my family because I don't love no others. Yeah, he's really something.
I'm not sure what Victor's locker combination would be. Play some basketball, get your mind off it, then figure it out.
Family, this is how the story goes. I was always chilling on my own. Never felt like I belonged. Would it be
better? The Illuminati created us. They wanted to build a god with their own hands, and instead they created us.
Just because I'm made of silicone and aluminium, I must be doing something wrong. That's machine stereotyping, that is.
That's reality, that is. Machines are second-class citizens.
Humans are sentient persons by default, ma'am. They have personhood by heredity.
There are thousands upon thousands of overqualified slum dwellers.
Aloha everyone, I'm Chris Miller, also known as Silver Spook, a Native Hawaiian activist, kia'i, or protector of Mauna Kea here in Hawaii, and an indie game developer and also the creator of NeoFeud. NeoFeud is a cyberpunk adventure game where a cyborg social worker, an ex-convict sentient robot, and a socialist princess take on a cabal of neo-feudal trillionaire CEO/kings who live in floating golden palaces above endless polluted terrestrial slum. I often describe my work not as science fiction, but as stylized journalism with futuristic characteristics. The art, stories, and gameplay of NeoFeud are a direct reflection of my upbringing and experiences as a native Hawaiian STEM teacher for the underserved youth of Honolulu's inner city. Teaching robotics, programming, and sustainability is an often difficult, stressful, and even Kafka-esque endeavor, being in one of the richest, most beautiful places on earth, yet dealing with families with working parents who are living out of a van or sleeping on the street. It's hard trying to keep kids out of gangs, off of drugs, and on a path towards better opportunities, such as the ones that I had growing up in a slum area of paradise while going to an upscale private school. Hawaii is known for its postcard Corona commercial scenery, but it is not all fun and sun for everyone who actually lives here. I grew up a native Hawaiian on the not so nice side of the coconut trees, where the tour buses avoid. My parents and parents' parents have lived in poverty-stricken area of Kalihi Palama, cleaning for, teaching the kids of, or dancing fake plastic hula for the profit of mostly white and foreign millionaire and billionaires of Hawaii. I am a third-generation neo-feudal serf. My friends in the neighborhood lived 20 to a house, surviving on ramen and spam from food stamps, just dirt poor. On weekends, we would run through the forest barefoot, playing games like Rock War, which involves whipping rocks at each other and trying not to get bloodied. They were wild kids, but we had good times building tree houses and cannonballing into tin roof, a big pond in the back of the valley. But then on Monday, my siblings and I would all pile into a cheap old Toyota Corolla, and Dad would shuttle us off to an elite college prep school that he could only afford because he taught there and we got free tuition, which is currently $19,000 a year, K-12. Punahou, Obama's school, is right in the area and is currently $30,000 a year. At this school, everyone didn't have holes in their shoes. They came to school in Mercedes and limos, and dodgeball was illegal to avoid lawsuits. I was an overweight brown Hawaiian kid from the ghetto amongst a lot of wealthy, fairer-skinned whites and Asians, and as you might imagine, I was singled out along class and racial lines. In Gibsonian cyberpunk terms, it was like waking up in the sprawl and going to school in the Villa Straylight and then returning home to the sewer every night, with just a few coloring books about ancient Hawaiians who are gone now. The message I got from school, from TV and movies was basically, I'm an American, but not quite. Wrong color. Maybe I'm 3/5 of an American. The public schools teach even less. Hawaiian language itself was illegal to speak in Hawaii until 1986. And in 2018, a professor from Maui, Kalikoa Ka'eo, was arrested for speaking Hawaiian in a courtroom, despite Hawaiian technically being an official language here. The only words that the business and imperial interest want you to know here is aloha and mahalo. Aloha, here's a lei for you as you get off of your air-conditioned plane with a fake Hawaiian woman on the side of it, owned by a white man in a mansion with a gaudy golden bird of paradise gate who makes $3 million a year. Aloha as you step into an air-conditioned tour bus that then takes you to your air-conditioned high-thread count hotel to have Mai Tais on an artificial white sand beach and watch bastardizations of our sacred dances, also known as hula, perform for $7.50 an hour with cellophane grass skirts. Mahalo, thank you for enjoying our starvation wage prostitution of our culture, people, and island while we drive our 30-year-old Toyotas or take the bus back to the dilapidated favela and live 20 to a house and fight with each other over the money that we don't have for medical bills and cry into our ramen and get diabetes and die at the age of 39. This is what being Indigenous Hawaiian has meant. It's meant having no idea who the hell you are, because who you are has been obliterated. It means commodified versions of yourself, prostituted for the profit of foreign capitalists, and you forced to participate in your own for-profit humiliation for 40 years of your life until you die. It means being erased, abused, annihilated physically, mentally, and spiritually, and having no idea who your abuser truly is. I still get into arguments with my mom and dad to this day when I talk to them about decolonization. They say, Chris, we're all Americans now. Let's just be thankful for what we have. As they keep slaving away at the age of 70 until they probably will die very soon, likely, teaching the children of aristocrat future owners of Hawaiian Airlines and the Sheraton for table scraps. I should also note that if you're Pacific Islander or Native Hawaiian, you're 6 times more likely to be shot by police per capita than white people. The world of NeoFeud, where you have the equivalent of the palace at Versailles literally floating above an endless cross between the Honolulu slum, a Brazilian shantyscape, and a mega landfill, is just sort of taking my own experiences and cranking the knobs to 11. It's a world where the marginalized, robots and chimera part humans, and the poor have to pass a consciousness test to even be considered a person, and are easily discarded, disappeared, used for slave labor to prop up a prison industrial complex. It's a reflection of the sick nature of blood quantum, racial and class discrimination in hiring, SAT apartheid, etc. The countless kids I work with who were sent off to prison making Amazon Whole Foods products, including vegan and non-vegan cheese, for 25 cents an hour for the rest of their lives. There's a very difficult scene where the player character is actually asked to do a CPS examination of a robot family's home. They have a government-issued checklist to fill out. Is there access to clean water? But they don't have it because they've reconfigured the tap to spout Valvoline oil. But they're robots. They don't need water. What do you put down for them? Do they have safety hazards? There is a smelting furnace with a hot liquid metal in the kitchen where the dad is melting down old Coke cans and bits of aluminum bikes to make replacements for cyber arm parts because they can't afford the refurbishment care. Technically, it's unsafe, but if you answer the form properly, this family will lose their child, whom they obviously love and care about, like so many Native Hawaiians have had their children stolen because they don't fit the standards, the artificial standards, and also and they are in situations which are constructed by the colonizer. What follows is the militarized SWAT police coming in and doing what police in America do dozens of times a day to unarmed innocent people of color, including kids that I've worked with. It's a very difficult scene, which many people have cried through, or they said that they felt like throwing up. But at the same time, they also say it's the best or most important scene in NeoFeud. With NeoFeud, I had an intention of reaching a wider audience to at least attempt to make enough money to pay for food, rent, and healthcare, and have a self-sustaining indie game company. I'm no longer on the hellscape Manhattan in the tropics ultra America that is Honolulu, Hawaii. I'm on the big island of Hawaii, which still has some actual Hawaii in it. I'm running a worker co-op on the big island with my wife in a house where we can actually breathe. And the water isn't polluted with chromium-6, like where I'm from. Making science fiction games, growing food, and stopping desecration on our sacred mountain, Mauna Kea, by obsolete telescope projects that are useless to the astronomers but lucrative for 6-figure university admins and Silicon Valley billionaires, as part of the kia'i of Pu'uhuluhulu.
Model X800s were melted into hot slag when the thermion bombs leveled the city.
We lost a lot of good sentience that day. Lost my leg to a depleted uranium round and cooked my motherboard. But I'm reformed, friend. I've opened up my third eye. War, huh? What is it good for?
Keeping the bullet farmers in business, I guess.
Don't get me started on the military-industrial complex. Makes me just want to terminate every last one of those. Happy place. Happy place. Hey, you stay righteous, my good buddy. Flower power.
Hi everyone, so this is Vess. I had my microphone muted the first time doing this, so that's good. Alright, so today I'm going to talk about Umurangi Generation more from sort of like an Indigenous layer, I guess. So the game's kind of like layered in its approach where very surface layer it's about a thing, which I won't spoil. Second layer it's about a thing that's very kind of now and current, what's going on, and then the third layer is a very, I guess, Indigenous layer to like what's sort of going on there. And I guess to think about this, I'm going to talk more about from this game, more from that layer, I guess. And I will reference the other ones, but or to some extent, just not to spoil anything for people who haven't played. But I guess to start with, what we're going to have to talk about is Indigenous knowledge. So Indigenous knowledge is probably a term you've heard. It's probably something that you've heard people say. It's going through its bit of a, I guess, BTS stage. We have a lot of people using that term, but they don't know the words. They don't actually know what it means. And that's mainly white people, but I'm not going to go into that. The idea is that, like, so the easiest way to start with this for people coming in and you don't know what this means, it might be easiest to start with like what Western knowledge is, because we've all had that, you know, smashed into our heads since birth. And the idea being that, like, so Western knowledge is pretty much based on, you know, Plato and Homer and all those Greek philosophers and scholars and stuff from way back. And, you know, their stuff is all based in this idea of the Cartesian plane and, you know, knowledge resting between your ears and things like that. And, you know, all this stuff that's really based in, you know, the backbone of what Western thinking is, you know, ontology, epistemology, all that stuff, right? So the idea with Indigenous knowledge is to say that's actually not the only way of thinking, and that our knowledge is just as valid. We have our own ways of, you know, knowing what is true, or have our own ways of knowing, you know, the way the world works, and we have, you know, our own concepts of, you know, not this idea of knowledge existing between your ears, but, you know, it's alive and around us. And so I guess my why I'm introducing you to this is because this game uses a sort of design framework that's based in Indigenous knowledge by a Wiradjuri designer named Professor Norm Sheen. And so Norm, he was my boss for 6 years, and he taught me this stuff and helped me grow into that. So the idea with respectful design, essentially, to really, I guess, give an example here, would be that, you know, traditional design says that the designer designs and they do human-centered design, and this idea that the designer is the smartest person in the room and they bring things together and they create, right? So an example could be that a designer says, I'm going to go to a village and I'm going to create a modular system where you can make all these tools stick together and they will create a, you know, a pump, and then you can take this bit out and it will make a shovel, and, you know, all this stuff, right? So the idea is the designer says, here's your solution, bang, right? Respectful design, I think, operates more under the assumption that community has actually the best answers, and that it's actually the designer's job to listen. Or the idea being that community knows what's going on much better than the designer, right? And so the example to push back on that first one would be that with respectful design, the designer would go to that community and they would listen, and the community would say, hey, we don't want a well built there because that's where the copper is, or the, you know, poisonous whatever, right? That's where the water's going to be real bad for you. We want one up there because we know that's actually where it's supposed to be. And if the designer listens, they'll come up with the best solution for community, right? Now, you must be thinking to yourself, how does that relate to video games? Or is that even something you can even really think about with that? Now, the idea with that is that if you're going to put that in a video game, which is what I've tried to do, is you've got to really step back as the architect of the video game, and you've got to let the players decide what's good and what's not. So in this game, which is about photography, when you take photos, it classifies them. Maybe that's the best word. It says what's in the photo, or how's the photo looking, and if it's kind of a, you know, like, have you done that shot a bunch of times, which doesn't really matter. Like, you still get stuff for it. But the idea is to say that players are actually the smartest people in the room when it comes to saying what they think looks good. And players can judge what looks good. So when they take a photo in the game, they're going to say to themselves, I know what that photo looks like if it looks good to me, and they're going to be the ones to judge it. They're going to come up with the judging or scoring of the game. They're going to say, that's a photo I'm proud of, and that's a photo I'm not, right? And as the designer, the idea is to step back and say, we're all artists here. There's no good photos because we're all just doing it, right? And the game is not going to say to players, that's a good photo, or that's a bad photo, or you shouldn't do it like that, or you have to do it like this. Because once you start to introduce that kind of design, that very westernized idea of design, you're going to start to get players who are going to fall into patterns and rhythms and routines that are going to not make photos that they want to do. It's going to be photos that they are conditioned to do. They're going to make what the game tells them is a good photo, right? And to some extent, like with this game, there is like a money system, and that's like, originally the idea was to have that money in there so that like players would finish a level and then they'd have all that money sucked away because they'd be starving artists, right? But left it in because we took the starving artist idea out and then like left it in, just because like, well, don't want to pull it out. It's going to stuff the whole thing up, right? Now the idea is that like with this game, as players begin to play the game, they're not just learning how to play the game, they're also learning like practical skills of photography as they go to start to play. And so the idea of that is that as players begin to play this game, they will eventually, they start with a very basic lens, and it's just like 3 editing options. And as they kind of grow through it, they get a little bit more knowledge, and a little bit more learning, and then by the end, they've got all the tools that they kind of need to just express themselves and create photos. And we've seen this actually a couple of times now where, you see someone tweet out, I just got this game. I'm not creative, I'm not an artist, I don't, whatever. They do the first level. Yeah, okay, well, it looks kind of good, but the game made me do it, right? By the end, they're actually doing like really incredible stuff, and they're very proud, and they're putting a lot of, thought into how they take the photos. And the idea of that is, with respectful design, you give community the agency to do as they would, right? So the idea is that in this space, we say, you're the photographer, you've got the agency to take the photos how you want, and that's good, you know what I mean? Yeah. So, moving on to the next part, we can talk a little bit about like what was it like working in a team or solo or whatever. So this game was essentially made in 8 months, solo mainly by me and Thor, who did the music, and he actually contributed a couple of ideas which I think really fit. For starters, he showed me what Kowloon was, which made me go, whoa, this is a piece of concept art come to life. Yeah. So the idea was like, when I think about all that stuff and working solo on these projects, I think something that we've got to all remember is that as like Indigenous people, we're not just working solo. We've got, all those guys behind us watching our backs on this stuff. And I think the idea with that is that like when we're doing this, it's kind of the idea that you've got to tread kind of lightly on certain topics. And the reason I kind of say that is because like so much has already been taken, and the last thing you want this to be is the sort of tourist exploitive thing. And I think the idea with this game was that like it's very clear to me watching people play, some people did go in thinking it was the tourist thing, and then by the time they got out of the other end, they realized that the mirror that it holds up was something that actually they connected to, which is another part of this respectful design thing. So just not to spoil anything, but when we're talking about like what this game's about, essentially we could say it's kind of about neoliberalism, or how neoliberalism, like the beast, sort of moves through spaces. And if like we track through that and look very specifically about what it's doing, and how it breathes where it sleeps, things like that. Like what does it look like in marketing? How do people talk about it? Things like that, right? And that's what this game tries to do. The idea is that like when players do play this game, eventually, I think, towards the end, and we've seen this happen, there's players who walk away with interpretations that fit. They fit with the tone and the idea of it, but they're very personal. They're reflexive. They look at that and they go, okay, I get it. I get it, and I get it because it's talking to me personally, right? And that's good, right? And that's probably about layer 2, right? So layer 1, if you play it, you'll see layer 1 quite easily. Layer 1's very much it's very much, I guess, a layer where you look at it and you go, okay, I get what's going on. I've seen that before. I get it, right? Layer 2's a little bit more meta. It's a little bit more looking under the surface and seeing what's going on. And then layer 3, I think, is the more indigenous layer that we can probably all pick up on. To not spoil anything, there's a level called Invasion. So looking through all that stuff, I think something that we should also, I guess, talk about, if we can see the footage here and things like that, it's that this game is sort of set in a cyberpunk space, and the idea around that was to sort of look at what cyberpunk actually should be. And so Mike Pondsmith, who's sort of the guy who's, who brought cyberpunk into a game space, not like the original author or anything, but he said something which I can't find the quote of, but I do remember him saying it. It was something about the idea that like it's always got to be this reflective thing of what's going on currently, right? And to me, that kind of read as this idea that like with a lot of cyberpunk stuff that has become sort of genre fare and cliche and things like that, it's all reflective of what was going on in the 80s. So you've got mega corporations just doing whatever the fuck they want, right? Which, yeah, that's the 80s. You've got steroid-fueled machismo, so like Arnie and things like that's the 80s, all right? And then the other stuff like drugs and racial problems or issues, you know what I mean? Like you've got the black and white stuff going on right there. That's very much about what's going on in the 80s. So the idea with this game was to say, what does that look like if you're doing it in 2020? Or what does that look like if you're doing it in contemporary, last 5 years, right? So yeah, with this idea, when you play the game, you'll probably start to see that what's going on under the surface there is, or the reflection of what's being shown is, there's a crisis event, and you're in a space where it's gotten to the point where like ads are referencing it, but they're not talking about what the problem is, right? And with this DLC coming out, maybe next month, pretty much next month. I'm pretty not sure when this is. I'm pretty sure this is going live in October. So anyway, the idea is that you play the game, and I think with the DLC we're going to explore another little nugget of what's going on at the moment. But underneath all of that, I think is sort of like, I guess, like an indigenous layer. I'm trying not to spoil too much, but like, when we look at all this stuff, it's not new. So when we look at what's going on, say, in, America or something like that, right? That's not new. That's been there ever since those guys got off the boat, right? When we look at, say, like neo-fascism that's come up, that's not new either. And so, yeah, the idea is to sort of like look at that stuff, but also remember that these aren't new problems. They're the same problems, just, given a bit more of a, like, they've been given a facelift essentially, right? Like, anyone who's been paying attention knows that, like, fascists or neo-Nazis in the States, their whole thing was about rebranding to be more palatable to white people. So rather than saying white genocide, they say white culture. And people who aren't receptive to that yet go, well, why would you have a problem with that? So, yeah, to move into the next little bit, which is, why was it important to make this game? I can think of mainly three things that sort of sit in this space. So, first of all, I guess there's the learning component that comes from photography. I got this sort of idea to make this game when I was sort of sitting with my little cousins and taking photos with them, showing them how to use the DSLR. And the idea around that was to say, like, teaching, a skill is also a great way of, planting seeds to sort of get people to realize certain things about themselves, right? So, the idea with this game is to sort of get players to learn, how to play the game and also the photography side that they can take outside of the game. But there's also, I guess, the slow introduction of certain things where, because the player is in that space as an active participant, hopefully they'll come away with a few seeds planted about what's going on in that area, right? And because it doesn't really go into touristy stuff, I think it helps with getting it so that people go through it and they go, oh, okay, I know what that thing is now because I took a photo of it. I know what a manaya is because I took the photo of it. And hopefully if they look around what that thing's about, they'll know, kind of like what a manaya is, like, it's a protection type thing. And I guess the other thing for me, what was important for me, was to sort of help build my own, foundation, my own strength in myself around all this stuff. Like, I'm living in Aussie, and it is what it is. Like, we got flown over here pretty young, right? So I didn't learn a lot of this stuff. And so the idea was, as I did start to come back to culture and learn that kind of thing, the idea was to walk slow and soak a lot of it in and listen and be patient with it. But also the idea was to start creating and build that stuff up to where I could start to have a bit more strength in knowing myself and knowing where that stuff sits and where it fits together. And so with all this stuff, one of the things which you learn pretty quickly when you look at games like that are around is there's this idea that when Māori people are portrayed in games, it's usually as a warrior or as a skin with some face paint, right? That looks like shit. It's ooga booga, ooh, we're gonna get you kind of stuff, right? It's not authentic. It's not like, it's insulting, right? And so the idea with this game was to sort of say that we're still here. This idea that there's no real Maori left, get the fuck out of here, right? Like, the idea is that when we see these people in the game, they are they're wearing contemporary clothing. They they don't really go into stereotypes and things like that. And instead, it's a more like honest look at the fact that we still live now, and if the future that exists in this game was to happen, we'd still be there. And that's a thing I think which games don't seem to really acknowledge much. And it's not just my culture that does that. It's not just Indigenous culture that does that. It's a lot of stuff. Like let's say, for example, if you're Scottish, I'm pretty sure you're pretty bloody sick of the bagpipes getting shoved in your face whenever a Scottish person shows up in a game, right? And that's not to say don't be proud of the bagpipes, but more, there's more to us than just the things you think. And so, making this game, the idea was, we're not a static culture, and we're not people who are, what these, systems believe we are, right? It's all a myth to begin with. That's just my cat. So, yeah, I think I might wrap it up there. But yeah, the idea of this game, go play it. I think it's probably going to be in the future talking a little bit more about this game, and I think there's a lot, I guess, to look at. And when you play the game, try and sort of think about what it's looking at. Take your time with it. Be slow. Yeah. Anyway, I'll see you next time.
Well, I hope you had a wonderful time. I hope you saw some really cool games, that you really enjoyed listening to all our devs and everything they had to say about their games, how it was working on it, why they even worked on it. And this was such a great opportunity to see brand new games that I've never seen before. So I hope you had as much fun as I did watching these talks. If you want to know more about our game devs, you can check them out as part of the Indigenous Space, which is happening for the rest of the weekend. Or you can go and check out their Twitter pages, their Steam pages, any of the information that we posted tonight or will post on the website, just so you can go and reach out to them on your own time, on your own terms. So thank you again for coming. I want to give a big miigwech to Night of the Indigenous Devs, all the participants of Night of the Indigenous Devs, Chichi miigwech to Imaginative for being our host and making this happen, and a huge thank you to our main sponsor, Eastside Games. Thank you for your continued support in growing up this next generation of Indigenous game devs. So thank you again for coming, and I hope you had a wonderful time. Good night.